Hey everyone, welcome to this next episode or next webinar that we have. It's been a little while since we've done one of these, so I'm feeling a little bit rusty this evening. But we're going back to, I think, a fairly familiar topic. We're looking at trusted caller identity. And this is, as we'll get into in the webinar, this is a proof of concept that we've been running both with 4 different entities. So we have Telefónica Tech, represented by Glyn. Glyn, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We have GSMA Foundry, represented by Helene. Helene, also, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm from Doc Labs, obviously, and we have TMT ID. They're not on the call today. But we've spent the last few months kind of trying to explore a kind of fundamental question of really trying to fix how people can prove who they are when they contact a call center. It sounds quite simple, but it seems to be quite difficult at the same time. And so this is the problem that we really set out to solve with this POC. And really there's, as Glyn will get into as we start to get into the actual kind of meat of the webinar, fraud is extremely rampant. Helen will also cover this from the GSMA perspective as well. And not just that, actually the user experience is quite terrible as well. And so we can routinely spend several minutes trying to access our accounts online, often passing private information and often information that's publicly available through our social media accounts to someone that we don't know in a call center. So generally a very poor state of affairs. And so the approach that we've taken combines kind of assets linked to mobile operators like Telefónica, SIM network APIs, and we also use Doc Labs Truvera own decentralized identity and verifiable credentials technology to really make call center authentication a lot faster and more secure. And so we'll get into this during the webinar. It will last for an hour as usual. The majority of it will be kind of conversational, but also running through what we've found from the proof of concept that we've been running for the last few months, kind of sharing some of that information, those learnings with you, and also kind of what comes next, because with any POC, it's really just getting to the starting gate. What comes next is the important part. Thank you also if you're listening to us in the audience or even watching us as well. If you could let us know where you're calling from, that'd be great, just in Riverside chat. But also if you have questions, undoubtedly we won't cover every topic that you would like to have answers to. And so please feel free to ask questions. Francisco, who's waiting in the wings, will collate those and we will get answers to you hopefully during or by the end of the episode. So thanks again for joining us. I'll pass over first to Helene. Helene, if you would be kind enough to introduce yourself, and then also pass over to Glyn before we get things started.
Sure, thanks. I'm Helene Vigue. I look after identity and data at the GSMA. And I think some people might not know the GSMA. We're the global association supporting the mobile industry. And I connect and support our ecosystem, the mobile operators and their partners, to solve digital identity issues that affect all industries.
Thank you, Helene. And Glyn, if you could do the same, please.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I'm at Telefónica Tech. So I'm in our AI and data teams, and I'm focused on digital identity and network APIs, and I've been working in this space for actually nearly a decade now. And I'm the product director there at Telefónica Tech.
Fantastic. So we're very well represented, and so yeah, we'll just get into it now. So Glyn, please take us away and let me know as I'm dangerously in control of the slide deck. I don't know why they gave me control of this thing, but we are where we are. So please just bump me along, and I'll keep moving.
Thanks, Nick. So just to give a bit of strategic context about this project, which we kicked off in the autumn of 2025. And it was really inspired by conversations with customers and really understanding the wider ecosystem, particularly around the call center context, which was that we were hearing that more and more impersonation fraud was happening into call centres. Obviously, we hear a lot about impersonation fraud and scammers calling us every day. I think I probably receive 1 or 2 scam calls, and we know that's leading to a decline in trust in voice from the carrier networks. But what we hadn't heard, or I hadn't heard about before, was so much impersonation fraud that's going into call centres. In other words, that's scammers or bad actors impersonating you or me and trying to convince the call centre agent that they are Glyn or they are Nick, and in order to access our account or do an account takeover and withdraw funds probably from a bank account or crypto, or maybe even air miles from British Airways or these kind of accounts where there's some kind of stored value behind the account. So with that market insight in mind, and picking up on some of the trends that were happening, and working with partners, we put together with GSMA and Dog Labs and TMT ID this proof of concept. So it's leveraging network APIs from the carriers, and it's leveraging, as Nick mentioned, the decentralized ID stack from Dog Labs. So really, we were trying to address this problem around impersonation fraud. We understood there's millions of calls into call centers every day, and actually it's quite a difficult process, as Nick mentioned, to try and prove that you are who you say you are when you're speaking to that call center agent. Often you've got to answer lots of knowledge-based questions. Sometimes you may know the answer to those, even though it's still quite a slow process. Sometimes you may not. Certainly a lot of people struggle, myself included, with remembering, digits 7, 9, and 12 of their secret passcode. Maybe it was a passcode I registered 12 years ago or 5 years ago, or maybe I'm just not very good at counting through the digits, which is true in my case for sure. So what we saw was that customers were sometimes spending 3, 4, 5 minutes passing the security checks, or maybe not even passing them at all in some cases if they couldn't provide the correct information. And of course, it was also using, I would say, legacy technologies like caller line identification, so CLI. That's where the network sends the phone number into the call center from the user, from their SIM card and via the network. And that's a kind of pre-identity check that unfortunately has been a vulnerable part of the network for some time now. So scammers and fraudsters are able to spoof those CLIs as a way of enhancing their scams into the call centers, and that's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. So that's kind of the strategic context. That's the problem at hand, and that's why we decided to take it on as a proof of concept, which has been running for the last 6 months, and we're really pleased to tell you all about the results on this webinar today. And so really the proof of concept was about reinventing call center authentication. It was applying some of the newer technologies from the carrier side, from the identity industry, and putting those things together in a small proof of concept that we thought could address this problem, which is impersonation fraud into call centers, and making life better for all of us, for the good guys, and making things much harder for the bad actors. So this, in terms of goals, what were we trying to achieve? Well, I talked about the slow speed of authenticating yourself with traditional methods, so we were trying to achieve a faster authentication. Obviously, that's for us as consumers, but it's also beneficial for the businesses because they can serve more customers, as they can process more customers more quickly through their call centers by reducing the time spent authenticating each customer. It's stronger security as well. So I mentioned some of the vulnerabilities this is addressing. So we wanted to address the CLI spoofing vulnerability, SIM swap fraud as well, which I think we saw from the last CFAS report last week was actually growing very significantly last year, especially with account takeovers. And phishing as well, of course. So these are quite well-known vulnerabilities, and the POC we put together tackles all of those head on and reduces those. And I guess finally, last but not least, privacy as well. In order to pass those security checks, we need to share a lot of personal information with people we don't know in call centers, and effectively. That's information that can be shared or written down and used again for bad actors who might be in call centers. So in order to provide a better privacy position. We've deployed the decentralized ID technology from DOC such that less information can be shared or needs to be shared with the call center agents from the consumers. So with that context, I'd like to hand over to Helene, and she can tell us a little bit more about how this sits in a global scale and a global context with carriers globally from the GSMA perspective. Over to you, Helene.
Thanks, Glyn. At the GSMA, we are looking at scam prevention as a shared industry priority. So it goes beyond the specific problem of call centers, and we're looking at scam as a global issue that's really become cross-border, industrialized, and it exploits digital and mobile channels at scale. It's increasingly automated and professionalized. And so we know the results. We often refer to the financial losses due to scams. This figure of $1 trillion in 2024 is often quoted. It's important to remember that not all of that is recovered. In fact, a very, very small portion of it, I think 4%, gets recovered. But the problem runs deeper than the huge financial losses. We believe that scams are eroding trust in digital services and in communications. So it affects the entire digital ecosystem. And it's not a theoretical belief that the impact on trust might happen. We can measure it. Last year, the GSMA commissioned a report into scams in the Southeast Asia region. Scams are very prominent there, even more so than in other regions. I think about 1 in 10 consumers there had reported they'd been scammed in the last year. So what we saw in that study is that people are worried about scams, but we saw that this translates into behavioral changes. A very large proportion of the people who responded displayed what we call social commerce caution. So a figure that I found striking looking back at those results was in Singapore, 83% avoid buying on Facebook and 67% avoid TikTok Shop. So people just not trusting digital services. And we also saw that a large proportion of respondents say they would switch financial service providers if they could get better security elsewhere. So of course we're worried about the impact on the mobile channels, but we know it affects the entire digital economy. And so we're making scam prevention a shared industry priority. We know we need a multi-layered response. So we're enabling mobile operators, technology partners, regulators, financial institutions to come together and join forces. So we do a number of things around guidance and resources and platform for collaboration. But when we look at this problem of authentication and the fact that, of course, most scams succeed because people impersonate a person. So we really need to improve user authentication as one of the critical battleground. So in this context, we're showcasing innovation to guide the industry for the next wave of technology development. So that's the context for this proof of concept, is one such innovation that we're showcasing to show where progress can be made in terms of technology. So talking of showcasing, in March, we run MWC 26. So it's the world's largest connectivity event. We had over 100,000 attendees. And there we made trusted caller identity one of those innovations we put on the big stage. We had a mobile identity summit all about innovations in the area of identity and trust, and we presented this proof of concept. We demonstrated it to the audience as well, and we also had a full day of demos available on the GSMA pavilion, alongside many of the selected demos that made it to the stand to be shown to the many visitors. So it was really a way to expose what is a proof of concept, but to really show that innovation can happen that tackles this problem of scams, and create conversations about next steps as well. Before we go maybe into these results, for anyone that didn't make it to the demo at MWC, I thought that Nick, it'd be good if you could play the film of what the demo looked like again, please.
Of course, I'll certainly do that. Let me just change over here.
For test results, press 3. For all other inquiries, press 4. Before we can discuss your account, we need to verify your identity for security purposes. You should now receive a notification on your mobile device in the TrueVera Wallet app. Please open the notification and confirm your identity by clicking the Confirm button. Thank you. Your identity has been verified successfully. Please hold while we connect you to one of our healthcare advisors.
Fantastic. And yeah, we didn't want to kind of risk the live demo, so we kind of went for the video. But I think it's useful as well because it gives a lot of the kind of messaging and things in there as well. And what we can get into now a little bit, I think, Glyn, you experienced a lot of this firsthand. Let me kind of jump back into the slides here. But I think you kind of actually went up to one of the call centers and you kind of got to see the impact that this would have firsthand. And so as I think we kind of start to look at the results, and it'd be great, Glyn, if you'd be starting just to kind of run through some of these with us. But I'll leave it to you just to kind of talk through some of these points, because I think we've been desperate to get some of this information out into the public for a while now.
Brilliant, thanks, Nick. So yeah, as you mentioned at the start of the project, I wanted to get a real insight into how authentication is happening in call centres. So I went up to one of the O2 call centres and listened to calls during one morning, and I think it was a great insight actually to validate some of our assumptions, and then that formed some of the assumptions and hypotheses we wanted to prove in the POC as it rolled out with a much wider group of customers. So I could talk a little bit about the results we've seen having run this POC for the last 4 or 5 months or so. And I think you never really know where you're going to end up when you're putting together new technologies. And perhaps they're not leading edge technologies. Network APIs have been around for a couple of years now. I think decentralized ID has been around for a little while now, but actually I think it's the first time these have been put together, certainly for this kind of use case. So I think that is pretty exciting. I was pretty excited about the project, and I wanted to see that actually we could get those kind of levels of interest from consumers, understanding the use case and using the service. And I think we definitely did achieve that. So pretty much everyone I talked to, and we talked to obviously many people at the show, but also during the many months we were running the POC, and showing it off with customers, with colleagues, and just friends and family as well. And I think universally the feedback I had was we get this pain point. We all have to call centres from time to time, usually under duress because we can't solve the problem with the app or the web site. And then we have to go through quite a laborious process, as we talked about, to prove that we are who we say we are. And that's besides listening to the really bad music and everything else on the IVR. But I think so the first thing that I guess was really great about the POC is we really resonated with our use case. So people really understood the call authentication use case. And that actually, if they had a way they could prove their identity that didn't involve answering lots of sometimes difficult questions, if they could get much faster through that process in a more secure way, and maybe even sharing less data, then that would be a really good thing. So just to share some of the qualitative data that we got back from trialists who opted into the POC, about 80% of them reported authentication was faster than normal. We saw that in the demo. I think that's been a really big achievement. And 67 felt it was more secure. So I think, we've got a lot of work to do on that security point. But I think in terms of customers preferring it over the traditional methods, we had a really great outcome. So 100% of trialists said they would definitely or probably prefer this authentication methods to the current methods that are in place today, that they're using today. So I would say really strong results from a kind of feedback perspective from the trialists. And I think on the quantitative side, we did see, authentications happening in less than 60 seconds for all of those people using the service as an average, which would compare with at least 3 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes with a traditional method. So from the POC perspective, we were really happy with these results. Now, getting a little bit more into the carrier perspective, and I'll take you through some of the different angles we're looking at for this. So from the commercial perspective, we're obviously looking to monetize some of these capabilities, as it is with the APIs, as it is with these solutions that we're putting together. And particularly in the call center as a service space, and also with relying parties, so brands that you'll know and love, and these will be the brands that are operating the call centers. So in terms of some of the next steps that we're looking to do, post the POC, we're looking to validate the cost model and the revenue model, and so we'll be doing a lot of work on that in the next months. Pricing needs to be developed and obviously validated with customers to make sure that that the cost benefit and the ROI exists for customers, and that's predominantly call centers and relying parties. And we need to develop initial models for the wallet-based solution as well. So with all this together, one of the next steps really is confirming if there's a valid business model or not. I think we have an inkling that there is, but we're going to do a lot more work to actually prove that out. From a more technical perspective, I think like I said, some of the technology that we've put together in this POC is not bleeding edge, but actually the combination of it is quite innovative, and I think that was really the innovation that we've demonstrated here and at Mobile World Congress, as Helen talked about. And I think what we do see though is the wallet market looking quite complex at the moment, and actually quite immature. So we know that there's wallets coming in the EU with the EU digital identity wallets. In the UK, we have wallet coming towards the end of this year. We're going to be able to access our digital driving license and other credentials in that wallet. And of course, many of us have been using Apple and Google wallets for many years for things like boarding passes, access to gyms and other more basic credentials, and those I think are quite familiar with customers. And I think finally, on the network API side, we've been rolling out network APIs in the addressing identity use cases, and putting these things together. Things like our number verification service, where we can effectively authenticate the phone number and the SIM card if that's in the customer's possession in real time. That's going to be something we really want to evaluate and see how do we put the best fit architecture together for a scaled deployment of this service. It's one thing to do this POC for 100 people, but of course our ambition is to do it for 100 million people, or let's say another way, anyone with a SIM card or anyone with a phone number, which is more than 6 billion subscribers globally.
I think the interesting Glyn thing, just to kind of jump in quickly, is as you were going down that list, it's just to realize how many moving parts there are for this technology right now. A technology implementation never happens in isolation. There's always other stuff moving around, but never has there seemed to be quite so much other stuff going around with eIDAS 2 coming in and its impact on use of decentralized identity, verifiable credentials and wallets. Obviously all the stuff that's happening now in the UK, it's really kicked into gear this year as well as all the other complexities that you talked about regards, pricing, making sure that the business case makes sense, the technology is all working together. It really is a pretty complex picture when you consider from an end user perspective what it does. And when we saw the demo, it's something that there's one click on your phone and you can potentially authenticate, but behind that, you just think there's all of this other stuff behind it. And I think it's just interesting that when you're not exposed to it as a consumer, you just think how simple it is. And maybe that's when technology is really successful, when it looks so simple. But knowing that all this other stuff that's going on behind the scenes and trying to manage all that is pretty tricky. So I wanted just to point out how different it is from both sides.
Absolutely. And I think it was Steve Jobs that said technology should be either beautiful or invisible. And I think, we can argue that our user experience is close to being beautiful, certainly closer than the traditional methods. And, there's an invisibility to it as well, which is all the technology behind the scenes, the wallet tech and the carrier tech, which is provided by the network APIs. But yeah, to your point about the wider ecosystem, I think, we're a commercial business, so we're looking to build commercial solutions that can add value to enterprises and our 350 million subscribers in the Telefónica carrier footprint. But we're bumping up against a wallet ecosystem that is predominantly led by government and people in state actors, and I think the conversations then become more challenging because a lot of their use cases are very much about helping citizens have access to government services, whether that's national or local government services. And maybe, with the EU wallet, of course, that should be interoperable across the EU. But I think, what I am seeing is I'm coming along with my commercial use case. And, we know we're addressing something that's a real big problem for businesses and for consumers, and actually landing that in that ecosystem that's coming from a kind of state context, if you like, is actually pretty challenging. So I think that is definitely one of the challenges that lies ahead. Is how do we mesh together this commercial business need with an ecosystem around the wallets that's traditionally come from a very much a government standpoint. And I would say that's both the opportunity and the challenge that needs addressing.
Yeah, very good points. Very good points. And I think you had more concerns and thoughts about security as well, Glyn.
Absolutely, yeah. So we've got a few of them on this slide. Clearly, as with any service where data is being shared and customer and subscriber data is being accessed, it's very important that we make sure we do a kind of privacy by design approach, so we make sure that the data is securely managed and that customer data privacy is number one in terms of how we look at the design of the service and the implementation of the service. Reflecting GDPR and all the other carrier-based national regulations, bearing in mind that we are, as carriers, we are regulated by the governments in the countries where we operate. So to that extent, we are national infrastructure. In fact, in most of our markets, we are critical infrastructure. So GDPR, is one of those laws we need to comply with, but there's also e-privacy and all of our licensing regulations as well. So I think that's a good reason that for carriers to play a role in this ecosystem. We've been trusted businesses, for many decades now, and we want to cement our role, in this ecosystem, leveraging our assets so we can address address identity use cases, and that's what you're seeing, I think, in this POC. But to cover some of the points on here, I think the one I would probably pull out most of all is the usual challenge of kind of privacy, the balance of privacy versus security. I think we see that very often in technology implementations, where there is a trade-off, no doubt. Sometimes the harder you make the user experience, the more the drop-off rate can be, the less engagement you get from consumers, but you might have the best security posture, if you like. So there always has to be that balance between the security posture you're trying to achieve and the vulnerabilities you're trying to address, but also getting customers through the door and delighting customers, I guess, making sure the experience really works for them. And ideally you can do those things in tandem, such that as we've shown with the demo, actually, it's kind of one click, you receive the notification on your phone, and about 10 seconds later you're authenticated into the call center. So I think that is the magic, where you can really find the right balance. And we're going to need to do more work on this, I guess, as we scale it up, because clearly the attack surface is much different from 100 subscribers than it is to let's say 6 billion or even 350 million that we have in the Telefónica footprint. So yeah, we'll be doing a lot of work as we get into the next phase of the project for analysing both the security and privacy by design aspects. Now, I think that's all I wanted to talk about from the carrier perspective. So maybe Nick, I know you've been around for and addressing identity for many years. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your identity industry perspective.
Yeah, glad to. And I certainly feel like I've been around for many years. So yeah, and it is interesting how we all have obviously these different perspectives, which I think is what makes collaborations like this really, really useful. You can kind of, Helene, looking from the super zoomed out global scale, Glyn again still looking at massive scale, but very much with a kind of operator lens on, and then from Doc Labs coming in as a provider, we have a kind of different perspective again. I mean, I think Glyn, when we kind of worked through this, one of the big things was trying to make sure that the user experience was as clean as possible, and so we had a couple of different options about how the user authenticates themselves. One was the presentation of a signed credential from the user. We also had running at the same time a DIDCOM message, which is an open standards encrypted message that comes through to the user and they simply respond to as well. And we actually went with the DIDCOM message just because it removed a click, and the result was the same. And as I'll show probably in the next slide, actually the using the credentials is far more extensible. But certainly just to say that the simple user experience for the POC was absolutely paramount for us. And of course, the distribution potential is something that I'd say, I'm not sure worrying is the right word, but I think we're very mindful of it. And so you can definitely wonder, this technology is not super new and it's used in other places. And why has it not been applied more readily here? Others have tried in the past. And so you start to think, well, why is that? Is it to do with things like distribution? How do you get this app into people's hands fairly seamlessly? You don't want to put it over there in a way that's requiring a lot of education. That can be a path to a very slow adoption or no adoption at all. And so I think, Glyn, you were kind enough to share certainly your brand in the O2, your brand in the UK O2's penetration rates of the consistent mobile app usage amongst your, I think it's monthly subscriber base. I think it was either 70 or 75%. It says 70 here. And so that's great because what we can actually do is embed the wallet within the O2 existing app, which is our best guess right now as to how this would be packaged. For the POC, we actually just used Truvera's own wallet app standalone, just because it was already in the app stores and was simple to distribute. So I think there'd be some things that we'd look at there. Other things related to distribution, it's also about, do carriers want to be the issuers of verifiable credentials? So in this example, it could be Telefónica or O2 issuing a customer credential to a user, and that user using that to authenticate themselves to a call center. But as we'll see, there are other use case options for that. And there's a question mark there, is, do mobile network operators want to become issuers? Are they concerned about the liability in doing that? Is there liability in doing that? And all those types of questions. So I think this is something that we need to explore, and we will be exploring during the next phase. I think even things like there's two kind of streams for onboarding customers. And so one would be new customers, a little bit more simple because they're onboarding for the first time. But how do we get those wallet addresses assigned to those users? How is that done? And the other part to that, which is maybe it's more complex, is actually existing users that already use Telefónica or O2 in the UK. How do they actually get wallet addresses, and how do we get credentials into their wallets? And so these are things that we'll need to look through as well. So some notions from a tech provider's perspective, and then also from the kind of market perspective as well. I think, Glyn, you'd pointed out before a recent meeting that we'd had about kind of Barclays had come up with I think it's just a push notification going into someone's app.
That's right.
But again, it's a way of them actually confirming that they're speaking to the network operator. And so it makes it clear at that point that there's more than one way to skin this cat. There are other solutions that, on the face of this specific functionality, look very much the same. But in fact, as well, under the hood, they operate quite differently. And so I think what this does, and I think you were we're kind of thinking, there's certainly more than us in this space, and we knew that from the outset. And so it does two things, as you pointed out. In the one hand, it means there's competition there, but on the other hand, it proves that other people recognize this as a significant issue and are actually even trying to address it themselves. They're not waiting for an industry to come up with a solution or a consortia to come up with a solution. They're just going out and saying, it's a big enough problem, we're fixing it ourselves. So I think we thought that was an interesting approach.
Yeah, no, I think we will probably see more examples like this. And I think with the banks probably feeling the biggest pain in terms of frauds and scams, in terms of the impersonation frauds into their call centres, then some of the leading innovators in that space have rolled out their own solutions, like the Barclays App ID. But I do think, like you mentioned, for me that validates very much the use case, and I think is helpful in highlighting that this use case really needs addressing, and we want to do that on a much wider scale. So I think we welcome other solutions always. I think from our perspective as carriers and global carriers, and I'm sure Helene will agree with this, we'd like to roll out a solution that any relying party can use, whether it's a small, large or medium-sized enterprise, anytime they want to, speak to their customers using a carrier network, which, so the opportunity for that is more than 6 billion subscribers globally. And we want to do that at scale, with technology that works, in the customer's hand with one click. But it's good to have, I think, these alternative solutions coming along and highlighting, the use case and the opportunity as well.
Yeah, and there are other solutions available as well. I think Telstra people keep coming up to me and saying, it's just like this other thing that exists. And so there's definitely other solutions out there. And Barclays is top of mind just because it's obviously a significant brand, and it's one that was kind of launched just in the last couple of weeks. So that's why that's there. But there are definitely other ones out there. I think what we also remarked upon is that these other approaches, they tend to focus on solving a specific single problem. And sometimes those can be quite powerful solutions. But I think one of the magical parts of verifiable credentials, applying it to this, is the extensibility of it. And so not only can you, by sending back a signed presentation as a user to the call center, verify who you are, but look at all the other things that you can do once you have a wallet at scale issued across a large network like Telefónica or any of the other networks. There's lots more other things that you can do. And so you can actually start to think of different use cases. For example, one that we've talked about in our sessions, Glyn and Helene, is the notion that mobile network operators, they do have access to information that other people simply don't. Things like, obviously, phone number would be the obvious one, but often know a reasonable amount of data about things like their monthly subscriber base. Obviously, address details, their ability to pay, and things of that nature. So you can actually get to a point where MNOs start to become potential identity providers if that's something that they want to do. And so that starts to get really quite interesting, something that's not possible if, with things like push notifications. And so the extensibility of credentials is exciting. Because one thing you do as a tech provider, and one thing that Doc has done, is often when we speak to companies about larger scale deployments, it can often become difficult because there is such a shift of technology that maybe is not in that business or in that use case today. There's things like wallets at play that maybe weren't before. There's these things called credentials. There's decentralized identifiers. And there's so much to educate the user on that, understandably, organizations can be concerned that they're going to lose people, that it's not going to work. And what we can do with this very simple use case of authenticating into a call center is use the technology in a way that's so simple, 1 or 2 clicks of your phone, that enables this to work. But in the result of doing that, you have this large scale deployment of all of this technology. And now you can start to educate users as they have it already. And it makes that job much more simple. And that for me is what's kind of so exciting. I kind of call it the Trojan horse of credentials. But this really is a kind of light touch way of potentially getting this technology out at scale. And so as we start to think about, Glyn, maybe Telefónica has relationships with other technology companies. And so maybe there's a notion that if you partner with a music subscription service, for example, and if they were to prove that they're a Telefónica customer, they might get 20% off or something off a monthly subscription with them. Then that can be something that the user can present the credential as they onboard with the subscription service. Instead of having to go through a painful onboarding web form, they upload a Telefónica credential that's pre-verified, populates the form with accurate information, and they can onboard. And it also reduces any fraud with that promotion campaign. And so you can start to get use cases like that that become quite powerful. So I don't know if any of those, Glyn, are ones that excite you or terrify you as a mobile network operator, but certainly we can see that there's a whole lot of other things that you can do when you have credentials and wallets at scale.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, related to that, one of the big investments the industry is making, and Telefónica has been very much behind this, is building out our network API business. So making sure that access to a lot of this data and these risk signals can be made available at global scale. And I think we're close to 80% of carriers globally supporting Open Gateway, which is the initiative that's really driving the opening up of carrier APIs. And actually it's the opening up of these carrier APIs which ironically are initially addressing mostly identity use cases. So things like lifecycle events. Has there been a SIM swap for this subscriber for their phone number? Has the number been recycled recently? Has the number been ported to another network? And actually all of these events are really critical when you're building identity infrastructure. When you're trying to rely upon, SIM card as a root of trust. And I think, that's really the story that's partly behind this POC, and a lot of the initiatives we're working on is trying to build a story around SIM card as root of trust, phone number as root of trust on a global scale, as regulated businesses, as first party data providers. We're extremely well placed to address a lot of these identity opportunities and use cases. And I think, one point I wanted to make about these credentials, let's say we do issue these at scale, but actually the issuance is maybe, the easy part, but actually I think the more important part is the ability to revoke credentials as well. So if we're having credentials that are bound to the phone number, or even the most simple credential, which could be mobile phone number as a verifiable credential, that phone number has a certain life cycle from the time the subscriber acquires it, they use it, and then eventually they might stop using it, or it gets given to another person or ported to another network. The SIM card might be swapped. These are all events that we as carriers know and process and manage in real time, because that's our expertise and skills of running mobile networks. And actually you can leverage that data in real time through the network APIs to actually really make us extremely robust trust anchor, if you like, which is bound to the phone number and the SIM card. And I think we're really excited to kind of build these solutions out at scale, leveraging the network APIs, leveraging new identity technologies, to address obviously the caller authentication use case, but maybe others too, like you mentioned, Nick.
Yeah, good points. I think so we're into audience questions, and we've got quite a few of them. And Helene, I wanted to kind of bring you into this one. You've been kind of patiently waiting for Glyn and I to kind of waffle on, so thank you for hanging around. And George, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I suspect I didn't, but George is asking, does GSMA have plans to integrate decentralized digital identity into every phone call in the future? So moving away from, as George puts it, a narrow use case and making it a generic feature.
Yeah, that's a good question. We are looking at the issue of restoring trust in communications more widely than maybe just this particular use case, for sure. I think one of the areas that we're looking at is how we establish the enterprise identity, who's calling me, or who's messaging me, in fact, for that matter. So confirming who is the enterprise calling a consumer is definitely also a priority problem that we think needs solving, and not just who's the consumer calling the enterprise call center. Whether the technology, his decentralized identity, why is the exact way we do that? I think it's still on the table. But we're making progress. We've actually, interestingly also showcased some progress in terms of proof of concept at MWC on this topic of verifiable communications. And we're taking next steps to really look at how we have a strong, robust process for our mobile channels to be trusted. When enterprise call consumers, they can trust that it is the enterprise who say they're calling them is indeed that one. It might not be something that we apply to the sort of peer-to-peer calls. I'm not sure that there is the same issue. We really want to avoid the hello, I'm calling from your bank, and that being credible, because consumers get used to seeing if this is coming from my bank, I can see that it is my bank. My operator has verified that, and I can trust that. So yes, in short, we are looking at this problem. But there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and especially to make that happen across the various communication channels. We've got messaging, we've got calls, and it needs to work in a portable way across all those channels. Yeah,
I think many people will throw a party when you can actually know that the company calling you is actually the company they say they are. Because I think I've got into a way of, if I don't recognize the number, it's not in my kind of contact list, I literally would just end every call, and just kind of that much erring on the side of caution. And it would be great to not have that problem. So I think once that one's solved, which I know is definitely not easy, I think it will make the trust in the whole system much, much stronger. Andre is asking, is the scam signal API considered or tested?
So I can answer that one. I'm glad you gave me that one, Nick, because that's an easy one to answer. Scam.
You're claiming it anyway.
Scam signal is one of the network APIs we've commercialized and developed in the UK, but now more widely in other markets. South Africa is rolling out in other markets at the moment, which was initially designed to address APP use cases. So in other words, social engineering that's happened from scammers calling victims, and then we were able to actually surface in the API a number of risk signals, if you like, to help banks understand if the customer was likely to being socially engineered. So short answer, yes, we are thinking about all the risk signals we've got in our toolkit, including scam signal, to build these kind of solutions, including in the caller authentication use case.
Helene, can I come to you in the next question? And I think it's interesting. Theo's asking, and I kind of felt the same way until we started to get into the process a little bit more and start to understand. And I think, Glyn, you'll have a view on it as well. But Theo's asking, given the apparent obvious benefits, and they're obviously, we've talked about the benefits to the business, benefits to the individual as well, why is there a need to build a POC case at all? And why is there a need to have a kind of viability of the business case around it? Are there blockers, legacy systems and things that are getting in the way? Some paraphrasing in there by me. But I mean, you have the industry-wide perspective, Helene. What are you seeing as the requirements to go through this methodical process?
I think, and Glyn will comment, I'm sure, but we're working with businesses that have many potential things they could be doing. Even to roll something like this out, when you're talking, putting this in the pocket of millions of subscribers, making sure it works, making sure they understand it, having all the operations to scale this, it is not enough that it's a good idea. Unfortunately, you need to do things properly, because otherwise it just won't work at scale, and it won't be sustained over the years. So our experience of working with mobile operators around the world is they need to be quite methodical. before they commit the investment, because they then know that they need to address a massive scale. They'll have people that might not be super confident with this technology. They need to support those people. So all of that needs to be taken into account when building the business case for a new technology. But I'm sure, Glyn, you'll have a much more informed view of this.
I think you answered the question perfectly, Helene. I mean, yes. In short, in order to secure investment from our executives, and it could be many millions or even double-digit millions of pounds to scale these up solutions globally, with the IT investments that are required, then the executives will be looking for a business case. They'll be looking for proof points. They'll be looking for feedback from trialists, and also feedback from enterprises that's positive in terms of suggesting there's a business to be built here and there's a return on investment for the business.
Very good, thank you. I can pick up the next one because someone called Nick, and I'm promising it's not me. Has this POC been included within a response to government consultation? No, it wasn't. It was just something that ultimately I think we can probably all blame Glyn for. He's the one that really drove this one forward. Sylvia is asking, and Helene, this is most certainly one for you. Is there a plan for GSMA to integrate verifiable credentials with eSIMs?
Good question. We're looking at a number of things in the area of verifiable credentials. I think you mentioned earlier in the landscape, the big push that's happening in Europe around wallets. Does trigger a lot of discussions, obviously for our operators to look at what they do in terms of verifiable credentials, and is there something around verifiable credentials and numbers. But I think that's all we can say for now. There isn't a plan as such to integrate directly in the eSIM.
Okay, yeah. Continue to monitor the situation though. Linking specifically to the POC results, Glyn, this might be for you because I know you spent a lot of time kind of working in the questionnaire as well that respondents were asked. But Theo was asking 20% of respondents did not agree the POC provided faster authentication. And he's kind of wondering why that is. And it's a good point, Ash. I don't know why that is myself, but he's asking, is it because they have faster systems? Did they not respond? Were they picked up in the results, or are using authentication methods that are faster but less secure? I'm not sure what they would be. But do you have a perspective on that, Glyn?
I actually don't, to be honest. And I'd love to know what the 20% are doing to get through their security identity checks in less than 60 seconds. So no, we didn't dig into more deeply why the 20% had said that. And
maybe they just didn't respond. I'm not sure if not responding was through throwing those figures off. I'm not really sure. But yeah, good spot by Theo. Harshita is asking, how is trusted caller identity different from a verified caller from the Camara project? I ask one of you to jump in on that if you can.
I mean, I can lead on that. Helen might be able to add some more colour. So I think we see scams happening both ways. I mentioned it at the beginning when we kicked off the webinar, and this is particularly addressing impersonation fraud from subscribers into call centres, but actually, there's plenty of impersonation fraud happening the other way around. So, when you look at your phone when someone's ringing, I think Nick, you mentioned you don't answer your phone calls anymore, and I think that's true of many of us. The idea is that there's a service that's available on carrier networks where you can verify that the caller is who they say they are on the device, including with logos as well and green ticks, and evidence that the call has been checked by the carrier for its authenticity. And that's really what that Camara service is addressing. So yes, and you might also hear it called branded calling. I don't know if you want to add anything more to that, Helen.
No, you've summarised it perfectly.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Glyn. And thanks for all these great questions. There's just a few more to get through. Theo, again, with another question, really appreciated. Theo's asking, did the POC consider scenarios of a subscriber that has no access to a mobile, example, stolen or lost, trying to get a blocked line, etc.? So where things go wrong, did the POC, I know the answer to that, but just asking because Theo's asked.
Yeah, I mean, what we did do is we built into the POC the ability to manually revoke credentials. And so we were manually able to generate events like port outs or recycle events. Lost and stolen we didn't build in, but we could do. And in the case of some of those scenarios, the credential got revoked instantly. And I think that's a really important feature that will be required in a scale-up solution.
Yeah, and I think the way that could go, I mean, would be that as the user acquires and gets a new phone and a new wallet address is assigned to that user after the identity checks have been done, a new customer credential is pushed into that wallet, enabling them to continue. And like you say, the old one's revoked, so no chance of kind of fraud there, but certainly an inconvenience, but certainly something that is, plenty of solutions in place to overcome those types of situations that do tend to happen now and again. Simon, second last question, we're almost there. How will the GSMA carrier API-based call center authentication models scale globally across different countries, carriers, and communication channels and providers? And then it's a long question. And is expected to follow defined standards such as GSMA, Open Gateway, Camara, or do you think it will be a country by country and carrier by carrier integration if it was to globally scale? It'd be great to get both your perspectives on that.
Maybe I can give the GSMA perspective, which is that, of course, we will push for the standard-based approach. Because we know this is the key to scaling ultimately. And maybe to complement that, I know it's at the end of the question, the question of does it mean a carrier by carrier or country by country integration? Even if you've got a standard technology that's underlying that, there still is a question of how you get this in the hands of the enterprise that's got the call center and might want to cover consumers in many markets and certainly across several mobile operators. So it's a problem we've seen across many other services like the network APIs that Glyn mentioned, and where we know that often we have partners that work with the mobile operators to make sure that this is commercialized in a way that's easy for the enterprise customers to access. But yes, technology-wise, of course, we will look to build on standards, whether they're the ones you mentioned here, or there might be existing verifiable credential standards, etc. That it might be a combination of technologies, as been outlined as part of the analysis that's happening now.
Okay, thank you, Helene. That's a really comprehensive answer. Last question from Casey. We talk a lot about scams and mobile carriers. I think maybe Glyn, you alluded to this as well. People also want to use voice over IP and WhatsApp. Is there a plan for those? How do we protect those types of call mediums?
I mean, great question. I think from a Telefónica perspective, I can say we're very focused on protecting our own channels. And we talked at the beginning about loss of trust in carrier-based voice and messaging services. So we've got a big job, I think, with these kind of solutions and other solutions like branded calling I mentioned earlier to bring trust back to the carrier network services. And I think we'll leave it. And if we do that really well, I think customers will stay with our solutions and stay with our networks. And keep using them. And obviously it's up to other providers, the US tech providers offering messaging and voice services to look at their solutions and decide what's appropriate in terms of scam prevention. I think as any provider of messaging and voice, we all want to make sure there's the best experience for our customers with the strongest levels of security. So I think in the carrier community, that's what we're working towards.
Very good. Great. It's a great place to leave it, I think. So we're out of time. So thank you very much for everyone that joined us today. Thanks for all the amazing questions as well. Hopefully you found our exploration into the world of call center authentication, this first phase, interesting and informative. And there'll be more to come, I'm sure. So certainly we'll be following this up at some point in the future. Wanted to quickly thank Helene Vigue from GSMA and Glyn Povah from Telefónica Tech for joining us. And we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.